I thought I had it all. A beautiful home, a thriving business, a husband everyone envied. But little did I know, my entire life was built on lies. I still remember the day I met him. James, tall, charming, the kind of man whose presence filled the room. Everyone admired him. I thought I had found my soulmate. When he proposed, it felt like the world had finally aligned. We were young, ambitious, and unstoppable. People called us the perfect couple. At first, life was magical. I poured my heart into our home, supported his dreams, and even left my own ambitions behind to build something bigger, his empire. While he spent his time charming clients and attending glamorous events, I was behind the scenes, managing the accounts, handling the employees, negotiating deals. I won't lie, there were days it was exhausting. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., go over spreadsheets while he slept, juggle meetings, suppliers, and deadlines. And yet, I smiled because I believed in us. I believed in the empire we were building together. But that belief, that naive trust, it blinded me to the signs. Little things began to feel off. He was more secretive than before. Phone calls and hushed tones, unexplained trips, and sudden mood swings. I ignored them, thinking, maybe he's stressed. Maybe the business is harder than he admits. And then, the first betrayal. One night, I returned home early from a business meeting. The house was dark, eerily quiet. I stepped inside, expecting the familiar comfort of our home. But instead, I found him. Not alone, her. A woman I didn't know, sitting in the living room, laughing, sipping wine. My world stopped. My hands trembled. My voice caught. And for the first time, I realized that the man I had given everything to was living a double life. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I just left. I walked out of my own home and drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of the impossible. How could he? How could he betray me after everything I had done for him? That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't let him see me broken, not this time. I started observing him, his patterns, his routines. Every little secret he thought I didn't notice, I did. Every fake smile, every whispered conversation. And the more I dug, the more I realized the empire I had built wasn't ours. It was his mask, his shield, his lies. I began documenting everything, every offshore account, every secret transaction, every manipulated contract. The woman he was seeing was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the glamour, behind the suits and charm, there was a man who had no regard for loyalty, no regard for the person who had built everything from the ground up. And then, the ultimate shock. I discovered accounts he had hidden from me. Thousands, maybe millions, siphoned into shell companies. Fake invoices, fake clients, everything meticulously designed to cover his personal indulgences, affairs, and debts. And suddenly, the empire I thought was his victory was a house of cards, and I held the blueprint to tear it all down. I felt something strange that night. Not anger, not sadness, but power. The kind that comes from knowing the truth, knowing the weakness of the one who thought they were untouchable. That's when I started planning. I knew the divorce was coming. He had hinted at it. He thought I'd crumble. He thought I'd beg. He didn't know that the woman he underestimated had become a silent storm. And storms are quiet before they destroy everything in their path. He thought he could cheat, lie, and walk away with everything, but he had no idea. I already knew all his secrets, and I was ready to expose every one of them. I thought I knew him. I thought I understood love. I was wrong. So very, very wrong. After that night, I started noticing everything differently. Every smile he gave me felt rehearsed. Every touch, calculated. Every word, a lie carefully crafted. I realized he wasn't just unfaithful. He was a master at deception. And I had been blind. I remember one evening sitting in the living room where we had shared countless memories. I looked around and everything felt alien. The photos on the walls, the awards, even the furniture, all of it a facade, a stage set for his performance. I felt betrayed on levels I didn't even know existed, not just by him, but by the life I thought I had built. I started paying closer attention to the way he interacted with people, colleagues, clients, even friends. He had this charm, this magnetism that made people trust him blindly, but I saw the cracks, the forced smiles, the nervous laughter, the quick lies that tried to cover the truth. And with every observation, my anger grew, not the kind that bursts in fury, but a slow, burning rage that fuels every calculated move I would make. Then came the business meetings. I'd always managed the numbers, negotiated deals, and handled the accounts behind the scenes. He took all the credit. He strutted into boardrooms, smiling, waving, basking in praise that I had earned. And yet, when I confronted him once, asking for recognition, he laughed. Recognition? You think this empire is yours? Don't flatter yourself. You handle the small things, I handle the real world, he said. I should have left then. I should have walked out, but I stayed. Not because I loved him, but because I realized that I had the power to reveal him, and power tastes sweeter than revenge alone. The affair continued. She became bolder. She sent messages while I was in the next room. He would make excuses, late nights, business trips, client dinners. And the worst part, I was still paying for it, covering for his mistakes, fixing his financial errors, smoothing out his scandals. I was the backbone of an empire built on lies, and he didn't even know how close I was to exposing him. One night, I decided to confront him, not with rage, not with tears, but with facts. I laid out the discrepancies I had found in the accounts, the fake clients, the hidden transfers. I watched his face shift, first confusion, then fear, and finally, the smirk. You think this matters? This is nothing. You'll never touch the real empire, he said, trying to intimidate me. But he didn't know me yet. He didn't know how meticulous I could be, how patient I had become, how every lie he told, every secret he hid had been meticulously cataloged. Every document, every email, every hidden account. I had copies, backups, evidence that would destroy him if I chose, and I would choose. I started documenting his moves, every transaction he made, every meeting he attended, every conversation he thought was private. I even set up digital trails, so every step he took left a breadcrumb. He was playing chess without knowing I had already set the board. The betrayal wasn't just financial or emotional, it was psychological. He enjoyed power, manipulation, control. He didn't just cheat, he humiliated. He made me feel small, invisible, and powerless. But that feeling was temporary. It fueled me. Every time he smiled at me, pretending nothing had happened, I felt a fire build inside, a fire that whispered, soon, everything will be yours, and he will regret everything. I won't lie, there were moments of doubt, nights when the anger seemed too heavy, mornings when tears threatened to spill. But I kept reminding myself why I had to endure it. Not for him, not for the love we once shared, but for justice, for exposing the truth, for reclaiming what was mine. The turning point came unexpectedly. He decided to flaunt his affair publicly. Another woman, another city, another scandal. He thought he was untouchable, that no one could ever see behind his mask, but he forgot one thing. I was the architect of the very empire he relied on. Without me, the walls he built would crumble. I began planning my revenge with precision. Not rash, not emotional, but calculated. I created fake scenarios, misleading him, giving him a false sense of security. I let him believe he was in control while secretly orchestrating the evidence that would expose him completely. And then came the moment I realized the ultimate weapon, his arrogance. He had made a critical mistake, the one flaw that even I hadn't seen coming. In his obsession with power and pleasure, he had left traces of himself everywhere. Accounts, transfers, signatures, emails, small mistakes that, when pieced together, painted a picture of deceit and corruption. And now, that picture was mine to reveal. He thinks he's untouchable, I whispered one night to myself. But everyone has a weakness, and his is just waiting to be exposed. I wasn't just going to leave him with nothing. I was going to dismantle everything he had built, brick by brick, lie by lie. And when it was over, he would understand exactly what betrayal feels like. He had built his empire on lies, thinking no one could ever touch it. But he didn't know. I had already built the map to destroy him. After weeks of observation, of collecting evidence and tracing every hidden account, every deceptive contract, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about acting in anger. True revenge is about patience, precision, and timing. And I had all three. I started small, testing the waters, little things that seemed innocuous but were meant to shake his confidence. A misdirected email here, a subtle hint to a colleague there. I watched him squirm in ways he didn't even realize. The man who once controlled every room he entered, now uncertain and cautious in his own empire. Then came the first piece of the puzzle, his secret accounts. Offshore accounts he thought no one would ever discover, accounts he used to fund affairs, secret investments, even personal luxuries that weren't declared. I found them buried under layers of fake identities, but one by one, I traced every penny. I felt a strange thrill as I uncovered them. This wasn't about money. It was about justice, about showing him that the life he had stolen, the trust he had broken, would no longer be his shield. I began compiling the evidence, organizing it into a dossier that would leave no room for excuses. But it wasn't just about exposing finances. I needed the story behind the empire, his lies, his manipulations, his betrayals, to be undeniable. So I started reaching out, quietly, discreetly, former employees, clients, even friends he had wronged. Each conversation added a new thread to the web of truth I was weaving. And the best part? He never suspected a thing. He continued his charade, flaunting wealth and success, flirting openly with his mistress, making decisions as if the empire were untouchable. Every boast, every careless move became another brick in the structure I would eventually dismantle. Then came the hardest part, trusting myself to act. I couldn't rush. If I acted too soon, he would hide the evidence. If I hesitated, the perfect moment would pass. I had to be patient, like a predator waiting for the exact second to strike. I remember the nights I spent going over every transaction, every contract, every email. I mapped the empire like a chessboard. Every move he had made was predictable once I understood his arrogance and ego. And with each discovery, my plan grew more precise. I also had to protect myself. He was cunning, manipulative. One wrong step and he could turn the tables, blaming me, painting me as the villain. I created digital backups, secure accounts, anonymous tips to journalists and investigators, just in case. I needed layers of security, just like he had used to hide his deceit. But revenge isn't only about strategy, it's about timing the emotional blow. I had to make him feel the loss, the betrayal, the humiliation. It had to hurt in the way he had hurt me. That's why I didn't rush. I watched him, studied him, noted his weaknesses and insecurities. Every flaw he had was now my advantage. And then, the ultimate breakthrough, one of his secret partners, a man he trusted more than anyone, made a critical mistake. A transfer logged incorrectly, a document sent to the wrong email, the kind of error even a seasoned empire builder like him could not anticipate. And suddenly, the empire he thought was invincible had cracks that I could exploit. I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to reveal everything, every lie, every betrayal, every deception, and I would do it in a way that left him speechless, humiliated, powerless. But I also realized something essential. Revenge is not only about destruction, it's about reclaiming yourself. For so long, I had poured my energy into his dreams, his ambitions, his empire. Now I would reclaim what was mine, my dignity, my power, my life. So I refined my plan. Step by step, I would dismantle his empire. Not recklessly, not emotionally, but methodically. First, the financial secrets, then the affairs, then the public exposure, and finally, the ultimate revelation that would leave no doubt about the truth. I also prepared for contingencies. He was unpredictable. Arrogant, yes, but clever. I had to anticipate every move, every lie, every possible defense he might throw my way. I created multiple strategies, backup plans, secret allies who would stand with me when the moment arrived. And as the days passed, I noticed a change in him, subtle, almost imperceptible, hesitation in meetings, unease in conversations, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. I had started to unsettle him without even revealing a thing. That's when I knew I was ready. The stage was set, the pieces were in place, and the man who had built his life on lies was about to learn that no empire, no matter how vast, can withstand the truth. He thought he was untouchable. He thought no one could see behind his mask, but I had seen everything. And now it was time to make him pay for every lie, every betrayal, every moment he thought he could control me. Sometimes the smallest crack is all it takes. You pry at it, gently at first, and then with both hands, until the whole thing gives. I remember the morning I decided to make the first move. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies show. No dramatic music, no sudden confrontations. It was quiet, calculated, clinical. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table where we used to plan futures, and opened the folder I had been building for months. The dossier looked harmless from afar, neat tabs, labeled files, screenshots, bank statements, email chains. But inside each sheet was a story, a life he had stolen and hidden. I chose the first target carefully, a mid-level investor we both knew, someone with enough influence to start a ripple, but not enough clout to snuff it out quickly. He had been one of James's quiet boosters, a man who nodded at dinners and signed off on deals, trusting the smiling face across the table. He was also the man who had signed the transfer to one of the shell accounts, whose trail ended on a small island bank. That mistake was the opening I needed. I wrote an anonymous email that morning. Short, precise, a single PDF attached, no accusation-laden language, just facts, dates, and documentation. I sent it to the investor, his legal team, and a financial journalist known for exposing corporate fraud. Then I did something people don't think to do when they want to make sure someone believes them. I planted a seed of ease. I included a note that read, "I don't want money, I want truth." It made it less about vengeance and more about justice. It made the recipient listen. The reaction was immediate in a way that felt unreal. Within 24 hours, the investor called James's office, voice clipped, trying to sound casual but failing. He asked for clarification. He asked for meetings. He probed, and in probing, he disrupted the safe rhythm James had cultivated. James's assistant, the one who always smiled like she knew everything and said nothing, forwarded a terse message. He's requesting all transaction records for the last 2 years. James tried to handle it the way he always did, charm and delay. He scheduled a face-to-face with the investor and promised to clear everything up. I watched him on that afternoon, his posture precise, his smile rehearsed. He believed he could talk his way out of anything, but he could not talk away the paper trail. At the meeting, the investor asked 3 precise questions that made James sweat. 1. Why was there a transfer to an account registered under an alias? 2. Why did the invoices match no known client? 3. Who authorized the transfer to the island bank? James gave the general answers he always gave, dodged specifics, credited vague departments, blamed administrative oversight. The investor, a quiet man with a sudden and visible anger, demanded an audit. He asked for verification from independent auditors and said he would not sign any new checks until everything was clear. It was a tiny victory, a small stone tossed into a large, still pond, but the ripples grew. Auditors are detail people. When they start asking questions, numbers move, and paperwork surfaces, and once numbers surface, they expose patterns. Patterns expose intent. I didn't celebrate loudly. Instead, I tightened the net. I sent the next anonymous package to a different journalist, to James's bank, to an NGO that tracked offshore flows. I didn't pump the river. I nudged it, watched it, and let gravity do the rest. He started to unravel in private, not dramatically. Again, no cinematic shouting matches, but there were cracks. Late nights at the office that weren't for work, frayed temper with the assistant who tried to keep everything tidy, a missed dinner he claimed was a client emergency that the calendar showed was a blank hour. He was used to people covering for him. He was used to being protected by the whisper network he'd built. Friends who owed favors, employees who feared loss of paycheck, lawyers who liked his social gatherings. But not everything fell in line when uncertainty touched his money. The first public sign came inside a glossy business magazine. An article that started as an innocuous profile suddenly included an investigative sidebar. The journalist I'd tipped had a knack for asking the right person the right follow-up question. He compared financial filings, matched signatures, and included a line that made James's PR machine choke. Several transfers listed under different names traced back to the same managerial office. It was subtle, almost academic, but to anyone who knew how to read between the lines, it signaled trouble. James read the article on his device in the study and slammed it down as if the words had burned him. He came to me that night, not to be vulnerable, but to control. "Do you know how damaging this is?" he asked, pacing. The old me, the woman who would have spiraled, would have demanded answers, would have pleaded, would have saved him. The new me, the one who had cataloged every lie, watched his face like a report and replied softly, "Yes, but you can fix it." You could have seen the relief in his features, that immediate switch from fear to confident problem solver. He believed in his charm. He believed in his ability to buy silence. But I had already prepared for buying silence. I had prepared for lawyers and smokescreens. I had prepared for PR spin. I had prepared for the exact words he would use. The difference was, I had a plan B, C, and D ready and dated. I had backups of the backups. That week, he held emergency meetings, called in consultants, asked for loyalty. He coaxed his board into a temporary show of support and promised a top-down restructuring. He said words that sounded noble: transparency, restructuring, accountability. But every phrase was honey-coated deception. He had never planned to change. He planned to survive. So I moved to the second stage, converting suspicion into proof that would stick in courtrooms and in headlines. It's one thing for an investor to question transfers. It's another for a bank to freeze an account pending forensic analysis. For that, you need more than an anonymous tip. You need a key, a file that links an alias to a real person, a signature to a date, a phone call to a transfer. That key was a mistake he made while hiding. He used a personal password for one of the administrative accounts because he was in a hurry, because the mistress needed a wire transferred that night, because arrogance always downsized caution. He wrote it down on a slip that an assistant tucked into a company notebook and forgot to destroy. The assistant, the one who smiled like she knew everything and said nothing, the same one who forwarded James's calendar invites, she had been quietly sympathetic to me after a small act of kindness I once offered months before. I had noticed her fatigue and dropped a thermos of soup at her desk one winter evening. She had cried for reasons I'd never pried into. She later told me she was tired of the lies, She was tired of doing the dirty work and watching him thrive on the backs of others. She gave me the notebook. I felt like a thief taking something sacred. But what she handed me was the exact password he used. It linked a corporate admin account to his personal emails. It linked a signature timestamp to a transfer. It connected a name to an offshore account. It was the sort of small, human error that can topple arrogant men, the slip of paper in the pocket of a suit that betrays the man who thinks himself immaculate. With that small key, we applied pressure in a way that could not be easily refuted. A forensic audit was opened. The bank, seeing the corroborated evidence, froze selected accounts pending further inquiry. Headlines the day the bank made its temporary freeze public. Accounts frozen in major corporate audit. The tone wasn't accusatory, it was procedural. But the public read the subtext. When banks take action, people begin to whisper. I watched James in those days and felt a strange combination of pity and triumph. He had built a stage for himself and turned the lights on only to discover that someone else was pulling the wires. The man who once played the conductor of his orchestra now found his instrument slightly out of tune. He lashed out at staff, cursed lawyers, threatened resignations. He called our friends, spun stories, and threw blame at non-existent enemies. It was ugly to watch. It was satisfying to watch. But satisfaction was never the point. Each move I made had to be defensible, precise, and morally aligned with exposing wrongdoing, not tearing a person down for the sake of cruelty. I didn't want to humiliate someone to feel good. I wanted to reveal a pattern of abuse of trust that had ripple effects. Employees had been underpaid, clients misled, charities misappropriated. The architecture of his lies had real victims. And that's when the first public confrontation occurred. He thought he would confront me in front of others to swing public sympathy back to his side. He scheduled a board meeting under the guise of transparency. He wanted to show that he was taking accountability and that the empire would stand. He wanted to frame me as the worried spouse, a private person harmed by public gossip. The press might have lapped up his contrition story. He expected allies to nod and forgive. I surprised him. I stepped into the room not as the vulnerable wife, but as the person who had the documents, the witnesses, and the moral high ground. I arrived with people who had been quietly gathering evidence of their own, the assistant, the junior accountant who had refused to sign shady invoices, and 2 former clients who had been bilked by promises and then ghosted. I did not raise my voice. I did not seek drama. I simply placed my folder on the table and opened it. Silence is a powerful thing, the kind that stretches and then snaps. He tried to intercept, to palm me off with his practiced charm. He offered vague apologies and explanations, but this time his lies had a counterweight. I read a few short passages from signed documents, spoke dates, read account numbers aloud, and watched the color drain from his face. It was not triumph that filled me, but a calm, steel clarity. People around us shifted. The boardroom was no longer a stage, he commanded. It had become a courtroom. He stood, voice trying to be controlled, and accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign. It was a moment he probably thought would break me. Instead, I leaned forward and said, "This is not a smear. This is accountability." The meeting ended with an independent committee forming, lawyers hired, and the uncomfortable realization that the empire's foundation might not be made of solid stone. He left the room under a cloud that night, head bowed, not from shame, but from calculation. He had to plan. He had to fight back. He had to survive. And that's what emboldened him to the next move. The move I had anticipated and set the stage for. I knew he would go public with a counter-narrative. Men like him do. They mobilize sympathy, hire the best PR, and make the problem about emotions rather than facts. He would spin betrayal into a morality play where he was a fallen hero. He would try to make me seem bitter and irrational. But I had rehearsed for that too. For every possible narrative he could manufacture, I had documented facts and voices to counter it. For every lie he planned, I had a documentary blade, evidence that cut through the smoke. So I waited. The public would soon see the next act, and the world would lean forward in its seat, expecting fireworks. He wanted fireworks. He craved them. But I preferred something else. The quiet collapse of confidence, the slow erosion of credibility. If a building burns down quickly, people say, accident. If it crumbles stone by stone, they ask why the architects were never held accountable. That night, I slept for the first time in months, without a dozen little anxieties pulling at me. Not because the battle was over, but because I had taken the first significant step. The net had closed one ring around him. The construction of justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is a long, patient tightening until the person who built an empire of lies has nowhere left to hide. He would answer back. He would spin and accuse, hire, and cajole. But the thing about a lie is that it needs more lies to survive. And lies build fragile scaffolding. The next move would decide whether his scaffolding held or whether it collapsed, and when it did, it would be uglier than anything he had ever imagined.